on you?
Yes, sir. Can I ask what this is about?
Cards like this don't belong to people like you. You understand?
Sir, I haven't done anything wrong.
That's what they all say. We'll sort it out at the station. Turn around. Now.
They put handcuffs on him in front of the entire block. They had no idea the man they just arrested had his name at the top of a $2,400,000,000 empire. But let's rewind to 5:48 that same morning. This is where it all started. The corner of Alameda Road and Blodgett Street woke up before the rest of Houston did. By 5:48 in the morning, the sky was still the color of charcoal and the streetlights were still doing their best against the dark. A group of men gathered on that corner the way they gathered every morning, quietly, without ceremony, without complaint. Day laborers, the kind of men who got paid when the work showed up and ate when the money came through. Will Smith stood among them in a gray work shirt with a frayed collar and steel-toed boots that had seen 3 Houston summers. He held a dented thermos that had once belonged to his mother, turning it slowly in both hands, the way a man turns something he cannot afford to lose. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the point. Will was 27 years old and carried himself with the kind of stillness that came not from peace but from discipline. He had learned a long time ago that the loudest man in the room was usually the most afraid, and he had decided early that he would not be that man. His hands were calloused from honest work. His shoulders were wide and set. His jaw held that particular tension that black men in Third Ward carry when they have decided to endure something and will not be moved from that decision. To anyone watching from across the street, he was just another brother trying to make it through the week. What nobody on that corner knew, what nobody in all of Third Ward knew, was that Will Smith was the only son of Charles Smith, chairman of Smith Capital, a financial conglomerate valued at $2,400,000,000 and still growing. Smith Capital had offices in Houston, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. It had its name on 3 buildings and its fingerprints on half the estate development happening in the Third Ward itself, the very neighborhood where Will now stood waiting for a stranger in a pickup truck to decide if his labor was worth $60 for the day. He had walked away from all of it 5 years ago, and he had not looked back once. Will had grown up in West Philadelphia, son of a man who was always building something bigger than the family he already had. When he was 9 years old, his mother, Miss Delia Smith, a Third Ward woman born and raised, who smelled like shea butter and church programs, brought him to Houston and never went back. She said Philadelphia had too many of Charles's shadows in it. She said her people were in Houston. She put Will in school at Worthing High, kept her Bible on the kitchen table, cooked red beans and rice on Sundays, and made sure her son understood that a man's worth had nothing to do with what was in his wallet. Will believed her. He had no reason not to. He enrolled at Texas Southern University at 18, studying finance the way his mother insisted and his own restless mind required, because she said if he was going to live in a world his father helped build, he needed to understand how that world worked from the inside. He was 22 years old and finishing his junior year when Miss Delia's heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in October. The doctors said it was fast. They said she would not have felt much. Will was not sure that was supposed to make him feel better, but he noted it the way you note things when the rest of your mind is somewhere it cannot come back from. He called his father 104 times over 3 days. He counted. He needed something to do with his hands while he waited for an answer that did not come. Charles Smith did not pick up. He did not send flowers. He did not send a representative. He sent an email 11 days later that said, "I am sorry for your loss." 4 words and a period and a name at the bottom. Will dropped out of Texas Southern the week after the email arrived. He could not stand inside a classroom that was supposed to be preparing him for the future when the future felt like a room someone had emptied without asking. He stayed in Houston because Houston was the last place his mother had been alive. He stayed in Third Ward because Third Ward still carried her in it, in the smell of the corner stores and the sound of the neighborhood settling into evening, and the magnolia trees 2 blocks from where she had lived that bloomed every April, as though they had no memory of winter. He took whatever honest work came through. Construction, moving, yard work. He did not complain. He did not explain himself to anyone. And somewhere in those years of early mornings and sore shoulders and cheap meals eaten standing up, he met Rochelle Baines. Rochelle was beautiful in a way that made a man want to be worth something. She had her mother's cheekbones and her grandmother's laugh and a way of tilting her head when she was listening that made you feel like the most important person in the room. Will fell for her the way honest men fall, completely, without strategy, without thinking about what it would cost him. He told her things he had not told anyone. He showed up for her family the way Miss Delia had raised him to show up, present, consistent, not asking for applause. He ran errands for her mother Claudette without being asked. He fixed things around their house without announcing it. He sat at every family dinner, every birthday plate, every Sunday cookout on the block. But there was something Will had been noticing for a long time that he kept pushing down, because he did not want it to mean what it seemed to mean. Claudette Baines had never once called him by his first name. In 5 years, not once. She called him when talking about him to Rochelle. She said that man when she could not avoid a direct reference. She looked past him when he spoke, through him. The way you look past something you have already decided is not worth cataloging. Will told himself it was just her way. He told himself some people needed time. He had the thermos in his hands at that early morning corner, and he was still telling himself things he was no longer entirely sure he believed. In his chest pocket, folded into a square small enough to disappear behind the pocket flap, was a piece of paper with a single number on it, $198,400.00. That was what he had saved in 5 years of day labor and odd jobs and early mornings. It was not the number itself that mattered anymore. It had started as a goal and become something harder to name, a proof, a record, a thing that existed in the world even when he felt like he did not. He turned his mother's thermos and watched the sky lighten slow way above 3rd Ward and waited for the day to start. Across town in a house on Tierwester Street, Rochelle Baines was getting dressed with the particular care of a woman who knows she is walking towards something she has already decided, and she was checking her phone with a smile that had nothing to do with Will Smith. The cookout at the Baines house on the last Saturday of August was not officially announced. It did not need to be. Word moved through 3rd Ward the way word had always moved through 3rd Ward, through back fences and front porches and a barbershop 2 blocks east, where information traveled faster than newspaper. By 3 in the afternoon, the smell of ribs and collard greens had reached halfway down the block. An old Al Green record was playing from a Bluetooth speaker on the porch, and somebody's auntie had already claimed the best chair in the yard. The sun was doing what the August sun in Houston always did, refusing to acknowledge that anyone had plans that did not involve sweating. Will arrived at 3:47. He came through the side gate the way he always came, nodding to faces he recognized, accepting a plate that was handed to him by someone's grandmother before he had fully cleared the gate. He had an envelope in his pocket. He had been thinking about Rochelle all week. He had been thinking about the number on that folded piece of paper and what it meant, and whether this was the moment to say out loud what he had spent 5 years building toward. Then he stopped. Rochelle was standing near the large oak tree at the back of the yard. She was wearing a yellow dress with her hair pinned up in a way that said this was not an ordinary Saturday. Standing beside her, closer than a friend, with one hand resting on the small of her back as though it lived there, was a man Will had never seen before. He was broad in a suit that had absolutely no business being at a cookout in August in Houston. His watch caught the afternoon light with the gleam of something that cost more than Will's rent for half a year. He had the smile of a man who had never once been told no in a way that stuck. Rochelle saw Will and her expression did not register guilt. It registered something decided. She spoke before he could. "Deshawn," she said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of people to hear clearly. "This is Will. He's somebody I used to deal with. Used to." The yard did not go silent. People were still eating, still laughing, still moving. But the people close enough to have caught those 2 words shifted weight the way people do when something real is about to happen in a public place, and they want to be near enough to witness it. Will kept his face still. He looked at Rochelle and then at the man beside her, and then back at Rochelle. "Can I speak to you for a minute?" he said. His voice was quiet, even. "Just a minute. Private." Rochelle shook her head. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here." Deshawn turned toward Will with the slow ease of a man who had already decided this was entertainment. He reached into the pocket of that August cookout suit and held up a single item between two fingers, the way a man holds up a card when he's done playing, notes the table to see his hand. A car key. A Mercedes key fob with the logo catching the light the same way everything on Deshawn Merritt caught the light. GLE, he said. 87-4. That's what I gave her last week. He let the number sit in the air like furniture, just so we're all clear on where things stand. Claudette Baines appeared from the direction of the porch with the timing of a woman who had been waiting for her moment. She folded her arms and stood beside her daughter and looked at Will the way she had always looked at Will, past him, through him, like the answer to a question she had solved years ago and did not need to revisit. She said nothing. She did not need to. The folded arms and the set of her jaw said everything she had never bothered to say directly in 5 years. Rochelle held the key. She turned it in her hand like it was a piece of jewelry. Then she looked at Will and said, loud enough for the people nearest to her, "You've been out here killing yourself to do what, Will? Give me something that doesn't even match what he spent on my engagement ring?" She did not wait for his answer. She looked at his work shirt, his worn boots, the thermos visible at the top of his bag. "I have been patient," she said. 5 years of patience. You think patience is the same as loyalty. It is not. The yard was quieter now. Not silent, but quieter in the particular way of a cookout when something real has stepped into the middle of it, and everyone is deciding whether to watch or look away. Will said her name. Just her name. The way you say the name of someone you trusted. Something shifted in Rochelle's face then, past the pride, past the calculation, into something that looked almost like relief. The relief of a woman who had been waiting to say something for a long time and was finally saying it. She took one step toward him and pushed him, both hands flat against his chest, hard and final, and Will went backward. And the ground came up, and the dust rose, and above Third Ward the sky was high and blue and completely indifferent. He sat there for a moment. His palms stung from the concrete. The laughter came from somewhere to his left. Not everyone, not even most people, but enough. Deshawn said something he did not fully hear. Claudette had already turned her back and walked toward the house, the screen door closing behind her with the sound of a period at the end of a sentence she had been writing for years. Will was still sitting on the ground when he heard a different voice cut through the yard. "All right now." The voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. That is enough of that. He looked up. A woman was standing at the side gate. She had not been there a minute ago. He was certain of it. She was not dressed for a cookout. She wore a simple blouse and jeans and carried her keys in one hand the way someone carries keys when they were in the middle of going somewhere, and something stopped them. She was not looking at Will with pity. She was looking at the yard the way a schoolteacher looks at a classroom that has gotten out of order. Not angry, just done with the performance. Her name was Simone Carter. Will had been seeing her face for the better part of 8 months through the service window of a yellow food truck, Mama B's Rolling Kitchen, painted in green letters, that parked every morning at the corner of Almeida and Blodgett, where the day laborers gathered. She sold fried catfish sandwiches and red beans and rice and banana pudding and sweet tea that was cold enough to make a grown man stop and close his eyes for a second. She knew his order without asking. They had exchanged maybe 50 words across all those mornings combined. He had not known she lived 2 streets over from the Baines house. He was finding out now. She walked across the yard without asking permission and without hesitation. She extended her hand the way you extend your hand to someone who needs to get up, not as a performance for the audience, not as a statement, just a hand. "Come on," she said simply. Will took her hand and stood up. Deshawn had been watching with the specific irritation of a man who had expected to be the center of this moment and had found the center moving somewhere else. He reached into his jacket and produced his own card, matte black, heavy, the kind that does not come from filling out an application at a bank branch. He held it up with 3 fingers the way he had held up the car key, turning slightly so the light caught it properly. "You know what this is?" he said to the yard in general. "This is not available to everybody. This is by invitation only." Simone looked at the card. Then she looked at Daesh with an expression that could have meant anything and said clearly, "You've shown us a car key and a credit card in the last 15 minutes. She did not raise her voice. "You got anything else, or is that the whole show?" A few people laughed. The particular laugh that happens when something true gets said in a room full of people who were thinking it but were not going to say it themselves. Deshawn pointed at Will. You defending this man? You even know him? I know he shows up to work before 6 every morning, Simone said, and I know he doesn't owe you a single thing. She turned to Will, her voice dropping a register. You need anything before I head out? Will almost said no. He almost produced the automatic response he gave everyone. I'm good, thank you, and let her walk away the way he let most things walk away. But he was too tired for the performance. He nodded once. She opened the side window of the food truck parked at the curb and handed him a container. Fried catfish sandwich. Red beans and rice on the side. Sweet tea cold enough that the cup was sweating. She did not charge him. She did not frame it. Did to him the way his mother used to put food in front of him, as though feeding yourself was not optional, as though she was not doing him a favor, but simply correcting an oversight. Will stood beside the truck and held the container and did not speak for a moment. Across the yard, Rochelle was accepting congratulations from a woman who had come over with both hands outstretched. She was smiling. Her back was completely to Will. It was not a pointed gesture. That was almost worse. It was simply the posture of someone who had already moved on inside her mind, and her body was just catching up. Across the street from the Baines yard, on the porch of a small house with a swept concrete step and a window box with yellow flowers in it, an older woman sat in a rocking chair watching everything with the unhurried attention of someone who had been watching Third Ward for a very long time. She was compact and deliberate, and wore her gray hair in a bun and her reading glasses on a chain around her neck. Her name was Brenda Carter. She had taught 5th grade at Burris Elementary for 31 years and had retired Naira knowing more about human behavior than most people learn in a lifetime because children do not know yet that they are supposed to hide themselves, and watching children for 30 will look like before they learn to perform. What people look like before they learn to perform. She watched her daughter standing by the food truck talking to the man who had just been knocked to the ground in front of a yard full of people. Then she said, not loud but with the particular carry of a woman who knows how to project without seeming to. Simone. Simone looked up, but Brenda said, rocking once, a man who knows how to be quiet when people are trying to make him small is usually holding something a lot bigger than what they can see. She said it once. She did not repeat it or explain it. She went back to looking at the street as though she had said nothing at all. Simone looked at Will. Will was looking at the container in his hands. Neither of them said a word about what had just come off that porch. But Simone filed it in the place where women file the things their mothers say, that they do not yet fully understand but know they are going to need. 3 mornings came and went. Will showed up at the corner before 6 the way he always did, bought his order from the window, did his work, came home. He did not let himself think about Rochelle. He put his hands on useful things and kept them there. On the 4th morning after the cookout, a black BMW pulled up to the corner of Almeida and Blodgett at 7:15, clean and deliberate, parking with the front wheels angled against the curb in the way of someone who parks wherever they decide without consulting anyone about it. Deshawn Merritt stepped out in a gray shirt, no tie, and walked toward the group of men at the corner with his eyes already on Will. I want to be clear about something, he said. He said it loud. What happened Saturday, you showing up to my girl's family event like you had something to offer, that needed to stop then. And it needs to stay stopped. Will turned the thermos in his hands and said nothing. Deshawn stepped closer. The other men at the corner found something else to look at. That was the Third Ward way. You do not get involved, but you do not get involved either. You find something neutral to study until the temperature goes back to normal. Rochelle told me about you, Deshawn said. 5 years of nothing. 5 years of it's gonna get better, baby, and it never did. He paused. His voice dropped in a way that made it more cutting, not less. You know what you are? You're a cautionary tale. You're what women tell their daughters about when they want them to stop being patient with broke men. Will looked at him once. Then he reached into his chest pocket, not for the paper with the number on it, not for the thermos. He reached past both of those things, and his hand found the card his father had sent 2 years ago by courier with a note that's for emergencies only. He had put it in his pocket that morning without thinking much about it. He held it up now, not as a declaration, not as a boast, just as the plainest available statement of fact to a man who had been performing wealth in front of him for 4 days as though it were a substitute for character. He was tired. He held up the card the way a tired man holds up the one thing he has been carrying that everyone else keeps calling a lie. Deshawn looked at the card and went still for exactly 2 seconds. Then he photographed it. One quick motion, phone already out, the snap of it done before Will had processed what was happening. Deshawn was already walking away and dialing. "Daddy," he said, his voice shifting into something harder and more specific. "I need you to run an account number." Somebody out here showing a black card. "Need to know if it's real." He read the digits off the photograph without looking at Will again. Victor Merritt was in his office on the 41st floor of a building on Post Oak Boulevard. He was the chairman of Merritt Financial Group, a private banking institution, old enough and established enough that it did not need to advertise. The kind of bank where the clients were referred in and the assets were discussed in rooms with no windows. Victor had the posture of a man accustomed to being the most consequential person present. He pulled up the account number on his internal system in less than 4 minutes. The name that appeared on his screen made him sit forward in his chair. He called Deshawn back immediately. His voice had changed, not louder, but colder and more precise. "Don't let that man leave the corner," he said. "Tell him he is under suspicion of fraudulent use of a stolen financial instrument. Call Houston PD. Tell them a suspect is being detained." Deshawn ended the call and looked at Will with an expression that had stopped being entertainment and started being something else. "You picked the wrong card to pull out," he said. "Sit tight. You're about to be educated on what happens when you try to play with things that don't belong to you." 2 Houston Police Department cruisers arrived at the corner of Alameda and Blodgett 9 minutes later. Will did not run. He did not argue. He set his mother's thermos on the ground at his feet and stood with his hands visible and let them put the cuffs on him in front of the men on the corner, in front of the food truck with Mama B's rolling kitchen painted on the side, in front of the full morning light of 3rd Ward, Houston, on a day that had started like every other day and was becoming something entirely different. Simone had stepped out of the truck when she heard the cruisers pull up. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms at her sides and watched. She did not cry out. She did not go to him. She watched with the focused, cataloging attention of a woman who is making sure she does not miss a single detail because she is going to need to think about this carefully later. As they walked Will toward the cruiser, he turned his head and found her face in the crowd that had gathered. He held her eyes through the window as the car pulled away from the corner. She did not look away until the car was gone from the block entirely. Victor Merritt arrived at Houston Police Department South Central Division at 11:43 in the morning. He came with his personal attorney and the particular energy of a man who expected doors to open before he reached them. He told the desk officer he was there about a financial fraud matter. He was shown to a conference room. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and waited with the patience of someone who had done this before. Down the hallway, in a holding room with a table and 2 chairs and a water cooler against the wall, Will Smith was given his one permitted phone call. He did not call his father. He had not called Charles Smith in 5 years, and he was not going to let a holding room be the thing that changed that. But there was one number from that previous life that he had never been fully able to erase from memory. A number he had dialed often enough during a certain period of his life that it had embedded itself somewhere under all the 3rd Ward years. He dialed it now. Sonia Woodward answered on the 2nd ring. Will said, "It's me." He heard her inhale. He said, "South Central Division, bring what you need." He said nothing else. He did not need to. He hung up and sat down on the bench and put his hands on his knees and waited in the way he had learned to wait, without theater, without panic, just present inside the difficulty until the difficulty resolved. Sonia Woodward arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon with a briefcase. A corporate attorney from one of the 3 firms Smith Capital kept on permanent retainer, and the specific composure of a woman who had spent 12 years solving the complications that accompanied serious money and had developed a professional immunity to being surprised by what those complications looked like. In 47 minutes, every document Victor Merritt had brought was answered. Every accusation was neutralized. The watch commander on duty had a conversation with 2 senior people who explained, in language that was never raised above a professional register, what would happen to everyone's afternoon if this matter were not resolved correctly and immediately. Will walked out of South Central Division at 9:43 that evening. The August night was warm and thick with Houston. Sonia was beside her car at the curb. She handed him a bottle of water before she said anything, which was something he had always respected about her. She gave him time to drink. Then she said, "He wants you at the Smith Capital Annual Gala, Friday, post-Houston, 8 o'clock." Will looked up at the sky above 3rd Ward. A few stars had found their way through the light pollution. "I know," he said. Sonia said, "He's going to make an announcement." "Public, he is not asking for your permission," Will said. "I know." She studied him for a moment. "You're not going to fight it," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," Will said. He got in the car. Not anymore. The Post Houston occupied a building that had been a post office for 60 years before it became the kind of venue that made you feel like you were standing inside something that mattered, even when you were just attending a dinner. The great hall on the 2nd floor was set that Friday evening with round tables covered in white linen, white orchids at the centers, and the particular warm lighting that costs money to look natural. The dress code was business formal, and nearly everyone in the room was honoring it. 397 confirmed attendees. The space smelled like flowers and the specific kind of ambition that had aged long enough to be mistaken for grace. Rochelle Baines was there on Deshaun Merritt's arm. He had attended this gala before on his father's behalf, and the relationship between Merritt Financial Group and Smith Capital was established enough to merit an invitation without question. Rochelle had dressed in emerald green with her hair down and told herself on the ride over that this was what she had been building toward. This room, these people, this version of her life. She held her champagne glass with both hands and told herself that choosing correctly felt like this, like being in the right room at the right time with the right man. Victor Merritt was at the bar with a glass something amber and the tight-shouldered posture of a man who had been waiting for a week to find out if the shoe he thought he heard dropping was actually going to drop. Charles Smith took the stage at 9:15. He was 61 years old in a suit made for him by a black head, Atlanta, a man named Clarence, who had been making suits for men who knew what a suit was supposed to do for 30 years. The suit was navy. It was perfectly simple. Charles Smith had spent his life walking into rooms as the most consequential person present and had made a certain settled peace with it. He stood at the podium and looked out at the room and did not smile first. He said, "I want to take a few minutes tonight to talk about something other than numbers." The room settled. Forks were set down, he said. "I have been building Smith Capital for 23 years. I have been exceptional at building it. I have not always been exceptional at other things." He paused. "I had a son. I still have a son. For 5 years I behaved as though I did not, and the reasons for that belong to me and to the accounting I owe for them." His jaw moved once. "His mother died 5 years ago. He called me. I did not come. That is the plain version of it, and I am not going to dress it up or explain it away." His voice had changed on the last sentence, not broken, but changed in the precise way voices change when a man sets down something very heavy and feels for the first time how heavy it actually was. He looked up. He said, "Tonight I would like to introduce to this room the heir to Smith Capital, and the man I should have been a better father to, my son, Will Smith." Will came from the left side of the room, not from a dramatic backstage entrance, not from anywhere theatrical, just from the left wall where he had been standing in a dark suit Sonia had arranged, and that fit him the way things fit when they were made for a specific person. He moved the way he always moved, without hurrying, without performing the arrival, same set brought to the corner of Alameda and Blodgett every morning, and to every work site and to every evening back through the neighborhood where his mother's memory still lived in the magnolia trees. He walked onto the stage and stood beside his father and looked out at the room. Rochelle's champagne glass stopped moving. It did not fall. It did not shatter. It simply stopped in her hand, halfway between the table and her lips, held by a hand that had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. She was looking at the stage. Her eyes had gone to a place that was past shock and past calculation, to somewhere underneath both of those things where the full understanding of what she had done lived without decoration, without defense. Without the story she had been telling herself about choosing correctly and deserving better. The glass stayed where it was. Deshaun said her name once. She did not hear him. Victor Merritt had put his drink down at the bar and was standing very still, with his hand pressed flat against the bar surface, which was the only thing that kept it from showing. Will said a few things from the podium. He was brief. He said that Smith Capital's partnership program would be open to businesses that did not have existing relationships or legacy connections. He said that capacity and character would be the criteria going forward, not proximity to people who already had everything. He'd said it in the level, unhurried voice of a man who had spent 5 years watching how the world worked from the bottom of it, and had arrived at some conclusions he intended to act on. When he stepped back, Sonia was already moving on the other side of the room. She crossed to Victor at the bar with a small smile that had no warmth anywhere in it. She said his name. She said that the Smith Capital Board had been reviewing the institutional partnership arrangements and that certain transaction patterns in the Merit Financial Group accounts had raised some questions. She said a formal conversation would be scheduled in the coming days. She said it the way a woman says a thing, when the saying of it is already the action, when the words are the first step of something that only goes in one direction from here. Victor's glass was very still on the bar. Deshawn arrived at his elbow and said something urgent and low. Victor did not respond. He was doing the mathematics of the evening, and the numbers were not going in his direction, and there was no version of the arithmetic that came out favorably. The investigation that followed was not initiated by Will Smith. It emerged from a routine audit that Smith Capital's new compliance team, installed as part of the transition Will had set in motion, conducted on all existing institutional partnerships. What it found in the Merit Financial Group accounts was not subtle, and it was not isolated. 3 years of transaction patterns moving money in directions that institutional funds were not legally permitted to move. By the time it was fully documented, there was no attorney and no contact and no amount of prior standing that was proportionate to what the documentation contained. Victor resigned before the formal termination was drafted. The federal inquiry that followed was, as these matters go when the documentation is that clear, a question of timing rather than outcome. Deshawn lost 3 partnership contracts within the first 60 days of Will's leadership, not because Will directed anyone to remove him, because the new standards were applied consistently to all existing relationships, and Deshawn's company did not meet them. That is how it works when the rules change and the person who made the old rules no longer sets the terms. Rochelle went home from the gala in the car that Deshawn drove in silence and sat on the edge of her bed in her emerald green dress for a long time. Her mother came in and sat beside her. For once in the 5 years that Will Smith had been in and out of their lives, Claudette Baines did not have a position to defend. She sat beside her daughter in the dark of the bedroom, and there was no comfortable thing to say, so neither of them said anything comfortable. They sat in the particular silence that follows the collapse of a story you have been telling yourself when it meets the story that was actually true all along. What Rochelle could not stop returning to was not the money. It was not the apartment or the car or the room at Post Houston or any of the tangible outcomes of her calculations. What she kept coming back to was 5 years of Will Smith showing up. Showing up for the errands nobody asked him to run. Showing up to fix the things in the house that nobody mentioned were broken. Sitting at Sunday dinner and being present in the patient, committed unremarkable way that she had catalogued as weakness, as a lack of fire, as evidence that he was going nowhere. She had looked at his quiet and called it small. She had looked at his constancy and called it settling. She had been afraid in the honest part of herself that she did not usually access, that decency was all life had to offer, and she had wanted something louder. She understood now what the loudness had cost her. The morning after the gala, Will Smith was at the corner of Almeida Road and Blodgett Street at 6:38. He was in jeans and a plain, dark shirt and the same boots he always wore. Mama B's rolling kitchen was pulled to its spot at the curb. Simone was at the service window with the ease of a woman who had been opening that window at this hour, in this place long enough that the motion was part of her body now. He got in line. When he reached the front, he said, "Red beans and rice. Sweet tea, please." Simone looked at him for a moment, then she said, "You still coming here?" "I'm still hungry," Will said. She handed him the container. He stepped to the side and leaned against the wall in the way he always leaned, weight shifted to his left shoulder, thermos in his right hand, watching the morning assemble itself over 3rd Ward. Simone served the last 2 people in line. Then she closed the service window, came around the side of the truck, and leaned against the wall beside him. They ate together without speaking for a while. The neighborhood came up slowly around them. the light changing color above the rooftops, the sound of cars on the underpass 2 blocks away, the birds negotiating the morning in the oak trees along the street. Will said after a while. I owe you an explanation, Simone said. You don't owe me a thing, he said. I want to give you one anyway. He looked at his food. Then he looked at her. And he told it. Not the way people tell dramatic stories, not with pauses built for effect or emotional crescendos or the performed weight of things that are meant to impress. He told it the way tired people tell true things when they are done carrying them alone. He told her about his father and his mother and Texas Southern and the 104 phone calls and the email that arrived 11 days late. He told her about 5 years of Third Ward in the thermos and the folded paper and the card in his pocket. He told it through to the end without editing any of it. Simone listened the way Brenda Carter had raised her to listen, completely, without performing the act of listening, without interjecting to demonstrate that she understood. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "What do you want now?" "For real." Will thought about it. "I want to do something real," he said. "Something that helps people who don't have the connections to help themselves." He looked at her. "And I want a life that's quiet, but not lonely." Simone looked at him from the side. "Those are two different things," she said. "I know," he said. Several weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon when the Houston heat had finally begun to consider moderating itself, Charles Smith drove across town in a car he drove himself. He parked on Lawndale Street in front of a small house with yellow flowers in the window box and a porch that was swept clean. He sat in the car for a full minute before he got out. He straightened his collar. He carried nothing. He walked up the porch steps and knocked twice. Brenda Carter opened the door. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, without hurry, making no pretense of being anything other than a woman who was deciding what she thought. Then she said, "You must be the father." She opened the door wider. "Come on in." He sat at her kitchen table. She put a plate in front of him before he had said anything important: smothered chicken, cornbread, sweet tea, and he ate before he spoke, which was the right thing to do. And she noted that he understood it. When he finished, he said, "I want to thank you for your daughter." Brenda Carter said, "She doesn't belong to me to be thanked for. She made her own choices." Charles said, "She made the right ones when they cost her something." Brenda looked at him over her tea. "What you came to say, go ahead and say it." He slid a document across the table, a deed. A house 3 blocks away in East End, updated recently, 3 bedrooms, a garden in the back, nothing extravagant, nothing that announced itself. Just a solid, permanent, good thing. "I built an empire," he said, "and I lost my son while I was building it. Your daughter helped bring him back to himself. I can't put a number on that. But I don't want you to worry about your roof." Brenda Carter picked up the document. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Charles Smith over the top of it and said, "Don't lose him again." Charles said, "No, ma'am." She folded it carefully and placed it beneath her Bible on the kitchen counter. "Now eat the rest of that cornbread before you go," she said. October came to Houston with the particular mercy that October brings to cities that had been holding their breath since May. The evenings were cooler. The light fell differently. The magnolia trees in Third Ward held their green a little longer, the way things hold on when they finally have enough to hold with. Will came to the house on Lawndale Street on a Thursday evening at 7:30. Brenda Carter let him in and said she was going to finish a chapter of her book and would be inside should anyone need anything, which was her way of leaving without making a production of leaving. She settled into her chair by the window with her lamp and her reading glasses and her Toni Morrison and left the porch to them. Will and Simone sat in the 2 wooden chairs that faced the street. The evening came down gently over the neighborhood. Someone 2 houses east was playing music at a volume that was respectful of the night. A porch light across the street came on. The sky was doing its slow, unhurried work of becoming dark. Will held Simone's hand and did not speak for a while. She let the quiet stand. She had always been good at that, at sitting inside a silence without needing to fill it, at giving a thing the room it needed to become whatever it was going to become. Then he said, "Simone." He turned toward her. He did not have a speech prepared. He was not a man who prepared speeches. He said the thing that was true in the plainest available language. "I never needed anybody to understand me. I had made a kind of peace with that, and then I met you. And you handed me food when I was sitting in the dirt, and you didn't make it into anything except what it was. You saw me. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. Simone's throat was tight. She did not speak. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a ring. Gold, 1 stone, clean and simple. The kind of ring that makes a decision rather than a statement. The kind that says, I thought about this and I know what I mean. He held it and looked at her and said, Will you marry me? Simone looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She said yes. Before he could respond, she held up one finger. Condition. Will's eyes moved. What condition? She kept her face straight for a full 2 seconds. Then she said, You keep buying from the truck. I don't care what your portfolio says. Don't become a billionaire and start eating somewhere fancy and pretend you don't know where Almeida and Blodgett is. You come to the window on Mondays like everybody else. Will laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes up from somewhere low and has nowhere it needs to get to, no performance, no destination, just sound moving freely through a man who has found his way back to himself. The sound of it went through the screen door and reached Brenda Carter in her chair. She did not look up from her book. She turned a page. But the corner of her mouth moved in the particular way of a woman who has been right about something for a long time and has been content to let the world catch up at its own pace. Outside on the porch, Will slid the ring onto Simone's finger. She looked at it once. Then she leaned into him, and they stayed there in the October evening with the music from down the street and the porch light across the way and the sky finishing its quiet business of becoming night. Neither of them had anywhere to be. Neither of them needed to be anywhere other than exactly where they were, on a porch in 3rd Ward, Houston, in the particular peace that follows a long and difficult arrival. There is a kind of man who confuses what he owns with what he is worth. He builds his case from the language of acquisition, square footage and horsepower, and the deference of people in rooms who have calculated that proximity to him serves their interests. He has mistaken the mirror for the window. He looks into it constantly and cannot understand why the reflection never fully satisfies him. Victor Merritt had been that man for 30 years. Deshaun Merritt was learning, at considerable cost, how much it had been costing everyone around him. And there is another kind, the kind who learns early that the world will tell you who you are if you allow it to, and decides not to allow it. The kind who stands at a corner before 6 in the morning with a thermos that belonged to his mother, and waits for the day without treating the waiting as beneath him. The kind who receives the food that is offered without shame and gives what he has without accounting. The kind who knows the difference between the life that will impress people and the life that will sustain him, and chooses sustenance, even when it is difficult, even when it is dusty, even when the people he loves cannot see what he is choosing or why. Will Smith had been that man before anyone in the room knew his name. He remained that man after everyone did. The money changed the scale of what he could do in the world. It did not change what he was made of. And on the corner of Almeida and Blodgett on a Monday morning the following spring, Mama B's rolling kitchen was at its spot, and the line was its usual length, and Will Smith was in it, 3rd from the front, holding his mother's thermos, waiting for the window to open, the same as he always was, the same as he intended to remain. This story was written with the assistance of AI, and reviewed for quality and authenticity. What did you think of Will, Simone, and Charles Smith? Tell me in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear from you. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, do it right now. Hit like, share this with someone who needs to believe this kind of story still exists. A new story is coming very soon, and you will not want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one.